Hello, my wonderful, beautiful people. Welcome back to another video. This is going to be a little more serious than my regular videos because this is a rebuttal to Ben Shapiro coming to UNCG, but also because I'm turning it in for a school project. Let's get right into the video. Also, I might have COVID. So if my voice sounds raspy or like f***ed up or anything, that's why I got this tea here, so it's not f***ed up.
I don't know, 5 years ago. Move forward about 5 years and heard these statements, they would think that they were absolute gobbledygook. You've heard that some men have vaginas and that some women have penises. And you've heard of pregnant men and men who chest feed and women who have prostate problems.
So this point he brings up is 5 years ago, trans issues were not as big, which he is correct. Trans issues in recent years have come more into the spotlight. That is partly because there are more people not only coming out as trans, but there's more medical research on it as well. So our understanding of gender and sexuality is changing. The world evolves and changes. And so does language. So when we say men who chest feed, women who have penises or prostates, that's evolving to fit our new understanding.
The simple reality is that the human species is sexually dimorphic. Sex is binary. We come in two brands, male and female. Those are all the brands.
There is something called being intersex, Ben. What? What? You mean there's more than just two sexes? What the? Oh my god. That's hard for his little conservative brain to understand. I don't know. Intersex people exist. That's all I'm gonna say.
Sex is defined not by chromosomes or genitals or hormonal profiles, but by gametes, which are mature reproductive cells. There are only two types of gametes, small ones called sperm that are produced by males, and large ones called eggs that are produced by females. Sex is therefore binary. It is not a spectrum.
I don't know if you know this, Ben, but there's people that don't produce those. So, what are they? Are they men or are they women? Also, there are people who produce both.
Overall, disorders of sexual development affect about 1 in every 5,000 births. Typically, treatment of those with so-called DSDs, disorders of sexual development, begin with determining the causes of the disorder. But these folks do not represent a quote-unquote third sex. They are either male or they are female, and they have a disorder in development.
Now, where Ben really fucks up is he brings the numbers into it. So he says approximately 1 in 5,000 people are intersex, and says that's not a good argument for saying that biological sex doesn't matter. But if you search up the actual statistics, it ranges anywhere from about 2% of the population is intersex. I'll put some information and some studies and stuff like that up here. So Ben, you are like astronomically off with these numbers. It is like horrendously laughable. Clearly you don't care about the facts.
According to our pseudo-medical activists, gender identity is completely separate from sex, completely disconnected in every way from sex. The separation between gender and sex relies on a very simple fallacy, that gender is entirely and completely socially constructed and thus separate from biology. Some is probably a social construction, but it is ridiculous to suggest that if a boy is effeminate, this is because he is actually a girl, or that if a girl is a tomboy, this is because she is actually a boy. But this is exactly what gender theorists now argue.
Oh, if a boy is effeminate, then he is a woman, and that is simply just not true. For example, a lot of my hobbies are stereotypically masculine, but how I identify and how the world sees me, and how I want the world to see me is as a woman.
Now, this was kind of self-defeating, because if gender is socially constructed, how can you even identify as a member of the opposite gender? Think about it. If gender is a completely social construct, then how, as a man, can you identify as a woman when the notion of what it is to be a woman is a social construct?
Because it's a social construct. You can change how people socially interact with you. For instance, if you're a man, you most likely use he, him pronouns. If you're a woman, you most likely use she, her pronouns. I was born male and used he, him pronouns for most of my life, but now the way I present and the way I want the world to see me, pretty much whenever I go out, she, her pronouns are used, and those are what I prefer. So, also, because I've transitioned and because I appear feminine, people associate me with women or assume I am a woman and therefore treat me like that.
If gender is a meaningless social construct created by society, why should it matter more than biological sex, which after all is grounded in reality? Why would you have to change your physical body in order to deal with a social construct?
So my camera died while filming this, so I lost the footage for just this one clip. But the reason why trans people like me change their body, even though gender is a social construct, is because we want to feel more like our internal identity. We want to feel more like ourselves. We want to feel like good in our body. That's why we go through surgeries, hormones, all that different stuff. It's so we can have our desired body.
Now, the reality is that gender dysphoria is a serious and tragic disorder. Those suffering from gender dysphoria, which in its non-politicized definition means the persistent belief that you are a member of the opposite sex, they have a tragically high suicidal ideation and depression rate. That suicidal ideation rate remains tragically high after surgical and hormonal treatment. And the mental health problems associated with gender dysphoria remain extremely damaging, even in particularly, except that's inarticulate.
But he brings up how people who are trans have a high suicide rate, and even after taking hormones or starting or doing surgeries, he says it decreases, but not by much. Ben, I'm gonna throw the numbers up here. That's a pretty good amount. Also, the fact that the suicide rate does drop when that stuff shows that it is working. Also, if we want to talk about, it's not necessarily hormones or therapy or surgeries that really decrease the suicide rates of trans people. It's being accepted by friends and family. And conclusions show that when people are accepted and affirmed in their gender by their family and friends, suicide rates drop drastically.
Transgender activists make an objective claim about reality based on subjective internal feelings. That is not sustainable. What's more, transgender activists demand that you go along with all of this and that you abandon reason, biology, physics, because we have to go back in time. So this point, he definitely misconstrues trans people and gender studies in general. He says that by pretty much affirming trans people, you are throwing out science and stuff like that when the science says otherwise, Ben. But here's the thing. As a trans person and knowing a lot of people that are trans, because of that, I don't even ask for people to necessarily agree with me or understand my transition or why I'm transitioning. There are two things that I ask of people, right? And that is to use my preferred name and my preferred pronouns. That is it. All we ask is that you treat us with respect and not misgender us and not dead name us. But people like Ben and this rhetoric that he spews causes people to go, oh, I don't have to validate or necessarily be respectful to this trans person. I don't have to respect them as a human being. I don't have to use their name. I don't have to use their pronouns because I don't agree with them. Now here's the thing. Gender dysphoria is extremely rare by the statistics. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, which is the gold standard for mental health care, those who had received a diagnosis of gender identity disorder or transsexualism and were seeking hormone treatment and or surgery represented just 0.005 to 0.014% for males and 0.002 to 0.003% for females. But transgender identification is now rising extraordinarily rapidly. One 2021 study now suggests that the rate of transgender identification among urban youth in the United States may be 9 in 100.
This one, he brings up the percentage of people that suffer from gender dysphoria, which he brings up numbers, which if you Google that on Google, that comes up, but that is not based on recent studies. Recent studies actually show that it is between about 1.3 to 0.5% of people suffer from gender dysphoria.
According to Abigail Schreier, in Britain in 2018, there was a 4,400% rise over the previous decade in teenage girls seeking gender treatment.
So he brings up the rise in people identifying as trans and people with gender dysphoria. As our science evolves and changes and our understanding of these issues become more aware, we get better at diagnosing them, recognizing them, and as society becomes more accepting of trans people and LGBTQ people, more people come out.
One reason for this is something called rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Conservatives like Ben love to bring up this point of rapid onset gender dysphoria. Which there was a bunch of issues with this study. One, the study asked parents of a anti-trans group of like parents whose kids came out as trans about their child's gender identity. So it didn't even ask the children, the actual patients, about their gender dysphoria and how long it persisted. They asked the parents, which to parents it seems like your kid coming out of trans, like that's out of nowhere. I never saw this coming, but to the kids or the person who is trans that's been struggling with that for years, it makes a lot of sense. So not only is the original study for rapid onset gender dysphoria not even a good study, most medical associations, most medical bodies have thrown it out as like it's not a good source, it's not a good study. Rapid onset gender dysphoria isn't a thing. It's made up and it's used by conservatives as a scare tactics to say that like transgender people are a social contagion, and that gender dysphoria comes out of nowhere, which is not true.
Press Secretary Jen Psaki announced this week that the Department of Justice would seek to prosecute states that prevented minors from receiving hormone treatments that can have permanent long-term effects and surgeries that permanently mutilate and sterilize these minors.
So, another, again, conservative talking point. We're trying to protect the kids. They're doing surgeries and giving children hormones. So let's talk about it. Surgeries. They always call it genital mutilation, but kids aren't necessarily getting trans-affirming surgeries. And if they are minors getting trans-affirming surgeries, they've typically gone through years of psychiatric evaluation. It's not just I'm like their kids coming out as trans and then the next week they're getting a gender reassignment surgery. It's years of therapy, years of psychiatric help and evaluation, if minors even get it, even if adults get it. Typically, in order to have a gender confirmation surgery in the U.S., you have to at least be living as your like your like gender that you identify as for normally pretty much at least a year. You need to get normally referrals from therapists and psychiatrists and stuff like that. It's not even an easy process for an adult, and takes a lot of trans people years to even get surgeries and stuff like that. So to say it is happening to kids is just factually wrong and not true. It's just a scare tactic. He also brings up hormones, which typically, if you are a minor and you're trans, and you're seeking hormonal treatment, typically the only hormonal treatment they give to people is puberty blockers, which have been used since I think the 70s or 80s. I'll put the actual date that puberty blockers got FDA approved, and they weren't even originally used for trans kids or trans youth. They were used for kids that were going through puberty too early. So they've been used for years, and they're safe. Giving children puberty blockers is not necessarily an issue, and if people are trans and they do go on cross-sex hormones, they're normally only given to people who are in their teens, who have, again, gone through years of psychiatric help and evaluation. It's not just like a coming out of trans and getting on hormones.
Calling it gender-affirming healthcare, which is more accurately determined biological sex-denying healthcare. It is not gender-affirming, it is a denial of biological sex.
So he also brings up, he's like, it's not gender-affirming healthcare, it's sexual, it's biological denying healthcare, which gender and sex, again, are separate. And gender-affirming healthcare is shown to work. Suicide rates drop, depression rates drop, everything drops. Like, it's shown to work.
In reality, somewhere between 70 and 90% of childhood gender dysphoria resolves, meaning without any treatment whatsoever, it goes away. People go on and they don't believe they're a member of the opposite sex anymore.
What about the 30% of kids that don't move on, Ben? Deny all kids trans healthcare, you know? The ones that do need it, the ones that are going to be affected even harder and even worse. Part of the reason why that gender dysphoria might go away is because people and kids are told not to feel that way. Part of those, it may be resolved. Some people may move on, some people may experience gender dysphoria and then they move on with their life, or some people may experience it and they realize that they'll never be able to transition because their family, their friends, their social situation wouldn't allow them to transition. So they shut it off and bury it in.
This, of course, should not be a major shock. Propagandists routinely twist their data to avoid the obvious implications of their own data.
Ben, did you just say propagandists routinely misconstrue information and cherry pick it?
By the way, even among those aged 13 to 24 who wanted to and received so-called gender-affirming healthcare, 44% seriously considered suicide, 15% had actually attempted suicide, far higher than the rates in the general population by like an order of magnitude.
So he brings up the suicide rates of people who want hormones and who have received hormones and their suicide rates. And here's the thing, they're alarmingly high, Ben. Don't you think we should be trying to do something about that? Don't you think, I don't know, the scientific studies that show that hormone therapy and gender-affirming care decreases suicides would help with that? So this is the end of the video. I guess I have to say thanks for watching. He did a Q&A afterwards, which the Q&A was, like, there wasn't anything that I really wanted to dissect in the Q&A because he didn't bring up any, like numbers or any factual things that, I could really, like, argue with. And also he got destroyed by Quentin Merritt, so I could put that in, but it'll just add more onto the video, I just wanted to add my 2 cents on the video, or on the video as a UNCG student. So thanks for watching.